According to my geek friends, television will soon be obsolete. After a hard day's work at one of the big three media multinationals, that is Sony, Mitsubishi, or Madonna, you'll come home and have to get interactive with a bunch of stiff-back hardware bozos. I don't think so. You'll want to kick off your skates, pop the top off an ice-cold Synapse Cola, and check out Sirius Television, the last one-way broadcast TV show in a world gone cyber berserk.
Hello, Zero Books readers and viewers. It's me again, Douglas Lane, and in this video, I'll explore the connection between cyberpunk and neoliberalism in the context of what may already be a faded nostalgia for the 90s. Along the way, I'll read some excerpts from The Freaks and the Machine by RU Sirius and from the Aufhbunga Bunga gang's book, The End of History. And I'll introduce a commentary segment from Alex Hochuli, wherein he explains withdrawal from Afghanistan and the neoconservative reaction to that withdrawal as a symptom of elite nostalgia for the end of history. In RU Sirius's book, The Freaks and the Machine, he describes how he came to found and edit the first, and perhaps only, cyberpunk culture magazine. He wrote, "The engines that propelled the technoid fervor that eventually birthed Mondo 2000, cyberculture, and even its scratchy cousin, cyberpunk, were, like so many other tropes, a product of the dissolution of the revolution of the New Left during the late 1960s and early 1970s. The virtual death of the New Left was what required the Paradise Now seekers to explore new avenues for the total liberation implied by the 60s revolt." Referring to the 60s in 2021 is risky. I imagine that millennials and Zoomers who encounter talk of the optimism of the 60s have a perhaps unexamined, cynical reaction. Talk of total liberation, the New Left, or the promise of technology brings forth a near-instant response. Okay, Boomer. It's worth considering just how the New Left conceived of its mission, how the leaders of the 60s conceived of their struggle, and how far away the New Left's conceptions are from the ideas on the mind of the left today. Once we do that, we might be better able to understand cyberpunk as a moment of transition, a moment of regression. If you enjoy these videos, you should click on the subscribe button and click that bell. And you should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Patrons get access to our behind-the-scenes parrot room discussions, where we let our hair down, dish out gossip, or go into the weeds on topics such as the tendency of the rate of profit to decline, imperialism, and the critical theory of Bernard Morton Capel. You'll also get access to our podcasts on From Crisis to Communization, Reform and Revolution, and the history of the Russian Revolution, just as soon as I can coordinate times to record with Danny and or my kids. Your support makes videos like this one possible. Thanks for watching. On December 2nd, 1964, a philosophy student named Mario Savio stood on the steps of Sproul Hall and delivered a historic speech in defense of the free speech movement, which had emerged at the University of California, Berkeley. A few lines of the speech became famous, or relatively famous.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart, that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
This machine that Savio is talking about was, of course, represented by a computer card that, back then, came with the following imperative: do not fold, spindle, or mutilate. However, the machine Savio referred to was also the government, and it was also the university system. It was the AFL-CIO and all the unions and all the labor bureaucracies. In 1964, at Berkeley, the machine was the whole of the new industrial social system that we'll call Fordism or state capitalism or the welfare state. The machines that one had to fight were not just the old mainframe computers that used punch cards and transistors or tubes, but also the managerial powers for whom such devices were the instruments of rational control.
Everybody ready?
To put this in context, we can recall the Port Huron statement that was issued by SDS, or the Students for a Democratic Society, in 1962. We can note that it consists of a call for the realization of American values, including individual freedom, democratic participation, equity, and the triumph of reason against tradition.
Groups and organizations in San Francisco.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission.
Most of all, the Port Huron statement called for a new left. It proclaimed, amongst other things, that this new left must include liberals and socialists, former for their relevance, the latter for their sense of the need for thoroughgoing reforms to the system. But by 1964, just 2 years later, the impulse to reform the machine of America had transformed into an impulse to make the machine stop.
Why weren't you close to your family? You shouldn't be so insecure.
By 1984, even an act of organized collective sabotage was too optimistic. Instead, a cyberpunk vision of sabotage emerged. But the cyberpunk worked in secret, and for wholly private reasons, and his was a solo act of participation in the system as much as it was an act of disruption. By 2012, the idea that disruption was needed, that not only disruption, but disruption with the aim of transformation, with the aim of not only slowing down the machine, but of stopping it and replacing it, was no longer tenable. Instead, even old radicals who had come to an understanding during the New Left began to believe that what was needed was not just to reprogram the machine, but to reprogram ourselves. Consider this clip from a conversation with Angela Davis of the Black Panther Party and Grace Lee Boggs, a former member of the Marxist sect Facing Reality.
Radicals don't usually talk about souls, but I think we have to be courageous enough about talking about what I mean by soul is the capacity to create the world anew, which each of us has. We have all been damaged by the system. It's not only the capitalists who are the scoundrels, who are the villains. We are all part of it. And we all have to change what we say, what we do, what we think, what we imagine.
And the reason I said I'm going to say something controversial is because I think that despite all of the disappointments, and we could go on and on and on about what Obama has not done, and about Afghanistan, and about Guantanamo, and about healthcare, and all of that. I think we need to figure out how to prevent somebody like Mitt Romney from being elected. And let me just say one more thing. One more thing. And I think that this time around, we have to engage in that campaign with our eyes open.
As much as we might be inclined to give Angela Davis and Grace Lee Boggs the benefit of the doubt, the fact is that they were as transformed by the development of capitalist relations, specifically of the transformation of Fordism or managerial capitalism into neoliberalism, as everyone else. Neither woman could muster up a political vision after the end of history. Instead, they could only present attitudes and sentiments as they, like everyone else, turned inward into a kind of performative apathy. That was a consequence of neoliberalism. A pervasive apathy infected even the activists. Alex Hochuli, responding to the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan this year, explained it this way.
The end of history, which started with the fall of the Berlin Wall and spanned the 1990s, the 2000s, and much of the 2010s, was a period of apathy. People withdrew from politics and stopped believing in any possibility of social transformation. And in those rare moments when we did engage politically, such as when a very small number of people opposed the invasion of Afghanistan, or when a much larger number opposed the invasion of Iraq, it all seemed to have little effect. It seemed to confirm powerlessness. For some, though, this was a utopian period. For the liberal establishment and its supporters in the professional middle class, for them it was utopian. For them, politics is about expertise, decorum, consensus, and the best of intentions. Like, for example, saving women from the Taliban, at the cost of over $2 trillion, and lots of women killed by US bombings, and a crony, corrupt, drug trafficking government in Kabul, built and backed by the US, that oversaw 20 years of chaos and war. When Trump came along, nearly the entirety of the establishment, plus middle-class liberals and a fair few conservatives, completely lost their minds. They were suffering from what we've called neoliberal order breakdown syndrome. That is, the inability to accept, explain, and respond to political change. These people, who benefited greatly over the past 30 years, either materially or in terms of status or both, they just couldn't cope with having their imaginary utopia punctured. They reacted hysterically. They pretended they were the #resistance, and they talked about the end of democracy, ignoring so much how they themselves had done to undermine democracy.
Listening to Hochuli explain why so many liberal elites objected to Biden's withdrawal, listening to him explain the media makers' nostalgia for the end of history, it becomes clear that for many, the neoliberal period with its attendant consequence, namely the left's retreat into solipsistic apathy, was a period wherein the machine was functioning as it should.
Media who think themselves independent and truth-tellers are all actually just nostalgics for the end of history, for American unipolar hegemony, and the forever war. The fact they put their criticisms in humanitarian terms, or in the technical terms of administration, complaining that the plan was, poorly executed, it's just indicative of their longing for a return to the end of history, when humanitarianism and technocracy were the ideologies that ruled, and ruled unquestioned. And so with the fall of Kabul, we're undergoing a second wave of neoliberal order breakdown syndrome that really broke out in 2016. The liberal establishment is reminded once again of what it's losing. For the rest of us, though, this historical moment offers an opportunity. The breakdown of the neoliberal order allows us to ask difficult questions about the capitalist class and their inability to rule. The end of history shouldn't be recoiled from. The growing turbulence of our age is exposing conflicts that had been disguised and masked for too long. Now, there's no going back.
What we should notice as neoliberalism collapses is that far from being brought down by hackers and freaks, it is crashing under the weight of its own internal problems and conflicts. And the psychedelic rebels of yesterday can only stand back and watch as the machine transforms itself once again. The cyberpunks are frozen in place. They are merely spectators. Thanks for watching this Zero Books video. If you enjoyed it, subscribe to this channel and click on the notifications bell so that you'll be alerted whenever we release a new video. You should also consider supporting us on Patreon. Our patrons get access to our Inside Zero Books podcast every week and can get access to the Zero Books Book Club and help us to continue making online content from the left.